As we close in on the end of Season 12, Riot's keeping the patches short and sweet with another nerf lined up for Aatrox, a massive buff to Rammus, and some added tweaks for Blitzcrank Jungle. 16 total changes to discuss for 12.20, so we'll be breaking everything down and providing you guys with a complete update on the solo queue tier list, thanks to the help of our challenger players and analyzing the most recent data. But before we get into it, be sure to check out SkillCapped if you want to truly get better at League of Legends. We're the only service that offers a money-back guarantee if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service. We do this because our service really does work, and if it doesn't work for you, you shouldn't pay. Learn more at the end of this video or click the link in the description below. With Halloween right around the corner, we have a new set of bewitching skins hitting the Rift. Receiving a skin will be Anivia, Cassiopeia, LeBlanc, Nico, and Senna. Moving on to the item and rune changes, Mortal Reminder will have its auto attacks to trigger grievous wounds lowered from 3 to 2. Very few champions even build Mortal Reminder right now, and if they do, it's not usually until later in the game. This buff won't be enough to change that. There are a few exceptions like Garen, who grabbed the item second, so it's a small indirect buff to him, but this change won't significantly increase the power level of any champions. A really nice buff to Bruisers for 12.20 is on the way, with Riot amplifying the power of Steric's Gauge. Bonus AD is going from 45 to 50%. Shield amount is increased from 75 to 80% bonus health scaling. The shield decay time is buffed as well, going from 3.75 to 4.5 seconds. Steric's has been overshadowed by Death's Dance for quite some time now, but that should no longer be the case for 12.20. If you're planning to team fight or the enemy comp has heavier magic damage, siding with Steric's over Death's Dance will be much better now. Death's Dance will still be great into heavy AD comps and if you're looking to exert your lead in the side lane more. Instead of Death's Dance being the no-brainer pickup, you'll now have to think about what item is best for the situation, which will give players who don't autopilot a slight edge up. Another change that will provide even more priority to Steric's is a nerf to Frozen Heart. Frozen Heart had become a staple defensive purchase on many Bruiser champions, so Riot has plans to combat that moving forward. Being such a cheap item, you could pick up Frozen Heart super early and hit an insanely quick mid-game spike, so the cost is being increased from 2,500 to 2,700 gold. Armor is up, however, from 80 to 90. 10 armor has a gold value of 200, so on completion, you're not actually losing value. The rock-solid base damage reduction is nerfed from 7 to 5. All in all, a pretty fair nerf that will have a small negative impact on many champs, but you can look at it from a different angle as well, as it being an indirect buff to many auto-reliant champs. If we see Frozen Heart purchased less, it means picks like Aurelia and Tryndamere will start seeing more success as the item shuts them down super hard. AP Bruisers will become a little more vulnerable for the exchange of extra damage as Demonic Embrace will have its health lowered from 450 to 350 while the AP is going from 60 to 75. Ranged burn damage is dropping from 1 to 0.8% max health. Just based off gold efficiency, this change is actually a buff for melee champions, as 15 AP is worth about 326 gold, while 100 health is only worth 267 gold. It's really going to come down to the situation though as to whether it's a buff or a nerf. When you're ahead and can press an advantage, this change is definitely a buff. However, if you're behind and are just looking to survive and scale, the added health can be more beneficial. As a result of the adjustments, Demonic Embrace will remain a great pickup on everyone who purchased it before, so no need to worry about dropping the item. Lethal Tempo has become the most popular keystone on the majority of ADCs, so it's receiving a nerf for 12.20. The bonus attack range is being lowered from 75 to 50 for ranged characters. Melee champions' bonus range is unchanged. For ADCs like Tristana, Twitch, and Kai'Sa who can swap over to Hail of Blades and perform equally as well, the lethal nerf won't really matter. Champs like Jinx, Draven, and Vayne who don't really have that equally as strong keystone are going to feel the nerf most. Top lane is the role with the most amount of changes this patch, and let's start off by looking at the Jace buff. Melee W mana restore is being increased by 4 at all ranks. Our bonus armor and magic resist will now have a 7.5% bonus AD scaling to it. 2 buffs to amplify Jace's hammer form, but not significant enough to see him move back into meta. We will be leaving Jace in our C tier for 12.20. Wukong's all-in power is being significantly bolstered this patch as his ultimate AD ratio per cast is going from 220 to 275%. Emphasis on the per cast, as you have 2 casts of Wukong R, so it's a ton more damage at level 6. Wukong has been a pretty average top laner as of recent, hovering in our A tier, but this buff will propel him into S for 12.20. Gwen has been a pretty weak solo Q performer for a while now, so Riot will be buffing her Q damage. Q damage per snip is going from 10 scaling to 26 to 10 scaling to 30. Q final snip damage is up from 60 scaling to 140 to 60 scaling to 160. Throughout the early levels, this buff won't be impactful at all, as the snip damage is not increased at rank 1. Q maxed at level 9 is when you'll feel the full effects of the buff. Considering Gwen's current power level, we don't see these buffs being enough to push her back into meta. If Q final snip damage was increased at rank 1, then we'd have a different conversation, but for now, we'll be leaving Gwen in the B tier. Set is going to become more vulnerable into AP top laners as his magic resist is going from 32 to 28. Passive regen is being lowered as well, but only from levels 1 to 6. To compensate, some damage is being tacked on to Set's passive with the right punch bonus AD ratio going from 50 to 55%. Overall, it's really going to depend on the matchup as to whether this is a buff or a nerf. Change will just make his harder matchups even harder and his easy matchups even easier. Since we don't see a ton of AP top laners played in meta, the nerf should not significantly impact Set's power level, so we will be keeping him in our S tier for 12.20. Eclipse nerf was not enough to push Aatrox out of meta, so Riot is doubling down and issuing a direct nerf for 12.20. Passive heal is being reduced from 100 to 80% of damage dealt. This is quite a big hit and will hurt Aatrox at all stages of the game. To be fair though, Aatrox has been absolutely dominant for months now, so it will be nice to see a shake up in the top lane meta. Thanks to this nerf, we'll be moving Aatrox from S into A tier for 12.20. The previous Maokai nerfs were not enough to alter his power level, so Riot's back with a couple more this patch. Passive healing is hit once again, going from 4.5 scaling to 12% to 4 scaling to 10% max health. Our cooldown is being hit as well, going from 120 scaling to 80 seconds to 120 scaling to 100 seconds. When you tack on the nerfs to Frozen Heart, Maokai is being hit from a few different directions for 12.20, and we see him losing a good chunk of power, so his tier list placement will be adjusted from S to A. For the top lane tier list, we have Nasus, Mordekaiser, Shen, and Darius locking down OP tier spots. We'll be keeping a close eye on Nasus this patch, as the indirect nerf to Frozen Heart will have a negative effect, as it's been a staple second purchase on Nasus for a while. We can't see him dropping completely off a cliff, but we may have to adjust him into S tier if the Frozen Heart nerfs prove to be too detrimental. Now that Maokai is dropping down the tier list, watch out for Sejuani to take over as the #1 tank. Sej is being played a ton at Worlds, but she's not picked much in solo queue despite her power level being exceptionally high. As we mentioned earlier in the video, expect a small uptick in power for certain fighter champions like Aurelia, Tryndamere, and Fiora. Less Frozen Heart, or at the very least a later Frozen Heart purchase, is going to help these auto-reliant champs a little. Best top laners to climb low elo the fastest are Sion, Mordekaiser, and Nasus. Now that Maokai and Aatrox have been nerfed, the highest priority bans include Darius, Fiora, and Nasus. 2 junglers are being buffed for 12.20, and first up is Evelynn. Q marked bonus damage is being increased by 5 at all ranks. W charm duration is going to be increased by 0.25 seconds at max rank. Nothing too crazy here, but our analysts see these changes being significant enough to warrant a move from B into A tier for Evelynn. This Rammus buff is such a nice quality of life change, as his W self-slow is being completely removed. On top of this, Rammus's R speed is going from 105 to 110% of his original movement speed. This W change is such a unique type of buff that accurately predicting Rammus's power level is very difficult. With that said, we definitely see Rammus moving into a powerful position, so he'll find a spot in our S tier for now, and we'll be sure to keep you up to date if anything new pops up. Next, Jungle Change is a small quality of life buff to Elise, as her Q cast range is going from 625 to 575. However, it will now target the edge of the enemy's hitbox instead of the center. Change should not result in a power shift for Elise, so we will be keeping her in our S tier for 12.20. The 12.19 Blitz changes made him an OP support, but a rather underwhelming jungler, so Riot wants to help out jungle a little more for 12.20. Passive shield is changed from 30% at all ranks to 15 scaling to 45% max mana. This scales with Blitzcrank's level, so it hits support way more than jungle. Q damage is lowered most significantly at max rank, going from 305 to 285. W monster damage is up from 60 scaling to 180 to 60 scaling to 220. E damage total AD ratio is going from 200 to 175%. E bonus monster damage is up from 150 to 175% total AD. All things considered, these changes don't feel like massive buffs to Blitz jungle. Will the bonus monster damage be enough to outweigh the Q and E damage nerfs? That's what it's going to come down to, and we can't see these changes being more than slightly net positive. As a result, Blitz will not be moving up the tier list for jungle and will remain in our C tier for the time being. For the jungle tier list, we have Bel'Veth, Fiddle, and Udyr as the premier carry options. One of the more underrated junglers at the moment who does exceptionally well into a lot of the top meta picks is Kindred. Kindred can fare quite well into Bel'Veth, Echo, and Udyr, while Kha'Zix is one of the few meta junglers she has a harder time against. With Graves being the most played jungler, Udyr is a really good answer. So much of your damage is magic with tank Udyr, so it really limits the power coming out of Graves' armor stacking. Statistically speaking, Udyr players are winning about 54% of the time against Graves, which is pretty nuts. Best junglers for low elo include Rammus, Udyr, and Bel'Veth. Our top 3 recommended bans of the patch for jungle are Udyr, Fiddle, or Bel'Veth. Just one mid lane change for 12.20, and it's a much deserved buff to Ziggs. I can't even remember the last time Ziggs mid was a strong meta pick. Of course, he has had his moments of brilliance in the bot lane, but mid Ziggs specifically has struggled for ages. A Q buff is in store as Riot will be providing Ziggs with 10 extra damage at all ranks. For a spell you can continuously spam off cooldown, 10 damage is a pretty nice buff. By no means will this turn Ziggs into a top tier pick, but it's about time the Hexplosives expert moves out of the B tier and into A for 12.20. For the mid lane tier list, it's Zed, Victor, and Vex as the 3 OP picks. We'll be adjusting Aatrox down the tier list, not just for top but for mid lane as well, and moving him into A as a result of the passive nerf. Syndra's true power level is really starting to shine through as an incredibly strong new build is gaining traction in Korea. Night Harvester is the rush item, and it's currently winning about 3% more than Luden's, which is pretty crazy. Syndra now has access to more mana due to her new passive, so building Luden's isn't as necessary as before. Harvester into Shadowflame and Rabadon's is the new core to try for 12.20. Definitely look to run First Strike instead of Airy or Electrocute, as the scaling aspect of First Strike works much better with Syndra's new kit. If you're adapting to Night Harvester and First Strike, Syndra is in a much better spot than her 49% win rate would suggest, so we'll be giving her the bump into S for 12.20. Best low elo mids of the patch are Swain, Malz, and Heimerdinger. Syndra, Zed, and Vex are the mid laners who should be banned the most. Not a single change for ADC in 12.20, so let's not waste any time and dive right into the tier list. There are a plethora of strong ADC options right now as Twitch, MF, Kai'Sa, and Tristana make up the OP tier. Miss Fortune is a smidge above everyone else right now, and since she's super easy to pilot, she is our #1 recommendation of the patch. Twitch gaining access back to his AP build is extremely big and makes him one of the most versatile marksmen you can play. As we mentioned earlier in the video, look to prioritize Hail of Blades instead of Lethal Tempo on picks like Twitch, Kai'Sa, and Tristana. Lethal had been a viable alternative in previous patches, but now that it's been nerfed, Hail of Blades will become indirectly stronger. Almost every single Vayne player runs Lethal Tempo, so she's going to be feeling the nerf more than others. Less enchanters in meta and the rise of more melee supports has also negatively impacted Vayne, so multiple factors lead to her moving into B tier for 12.20. The best low elo bot lane carries are Tristana, Miss Fortune, and Seraphine. Miss Fortune, Kai'Sa, and Twitch are the highest priority bot lane bans. I guess Riot just forgot bot lane exists this patch, as just like ADC, support has no direct changes either. Blitz and Mao changes were targeted at other roles, but will still have an effect on support, so we can touch on those. OP tier for support will consist of Janna and Amumu. Since support Maokai has less access to gold and experience, the nerfs don't hit him nearly as hard for support. You very rarely ever hit level 16 on support, so the cooldown nerf at max rank on R does not matter at all. Passive healing nerf will hit a little bit more, but all in all, Maokai will remain one of the better supports for 12.20, as we'll only be adjusting him from OP into S. As for Blitz, he shot up to over a 54% win rate after the 12.19 buffs, so even if these 12.20 nerfs hit him a significant amount, he'll still be in a good spot relative to everyone else. The passive shield nerf is the big one, as its power is being chopped in half at level 1. Q nerf does not come into effect until level 4, so Blitz's all-in damage early on will remain strong. E damage nerf is the third hit to Blitz support, so even though by themselves the changes aren't insane, when added together he will be losing a considerable amount of power. Since Blitz was super OP in 12.19, we'll only be adjusting him into S tier despite the severity of the nerfs. The best low elo supports of the patch are Amumu, Maokai, and Zyra. Janna, Amumu, and Blitz are 3 of the most optimal support bans. Alright guys, before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little more about SkillCapped. So, we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee, and think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered that, right? Not us. We've offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we're able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium league guides on the internet. We add over 20 videos a week, with over 1,600 guides curated into over 100 courses no one can compare. We've also sent challenger players into Elo Hell 714 times and counting, where they commentate how to carry live. They also respond to all questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $6.99 a month if you are serious about improving. So that's going to wrap it all up for our 12.20 tier list update. Thank you all so much for watching, good luck in solo queue, and have a great day.